Day 813 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 489,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,410 in the past day, well above averages. Then as for hardware losses, 18 tanks, 14 APVs, and a whopping 38 artillery. And you'll also notice 2 aircraft and 1 helicopter. And I'll get into some of those soon. So we'll head to the map with a lot of activity happening in Russia, as starting off, we saw the fast and agile Ukrainian Laty drone roaming the Russian skies before hitting their targets, including that of the Tuapse oil refinery, so we'll zoom in there, which now burns after a UAV attack. And seen here, a Ukrainian attack drone flies into the already burning Tuapse refinery due to a previous drone meeting its destination not long before. And in fact, the Tuapse refinery was one of the first oil refineries to be hit this year in January, that caused significant damage to the primary oil processing units. In fact, the damage was so bad from that event that the repair work only completed about 2 weeks ago, back on May 1st. Thus, it's fairly obvious in hindsight that this refinery was ready to be hit again, with Ukrainian UAVs learning all the lessons from all of their previous runs of those flights' telemetry data. Then, almost right next door, we saw in the early hours of this morning that Ukrainian drones launched a devastating assault on Russian infrastructure at Novorossiysk, striking the port and oil infrastructure with explosive force. Locals reported hearing at least 30 powerful blasts throughout the night, as the sounds of drones and air defense actively echoed across the region. Surprisingly, for this event, there's no shortage of reports specifying that missiles were involved in this latest series of events, which is a very thought-provoking concept, given that this location is 350 kilometers away from the nearest Ukrainian-held land point, which leaves very few options for what type of missile could have been used, as ATACMS and Storm Shadows only reach about 300 kilometers or 250 kilometers respectively. So if true, then it may have been from an upgraded old Soviet missile, which Ukraine has been known to use, or an upgraded Ukrainian Neptune missile. But also worthy of a mention is that Ukraine is firing missiles from unmanned naval drones now, from their Magura 5s, like that of the R-73 missiles. Now those old missiles of Soviet vintage don't have a lot of range, but they don't really need it, given that the Magura V5 drones can traverse up to 1,000 kilometers these days. Now, back to the port and oil depot infrastructure. Russia had previously strengthened the port's defenses following a series of crippling Ukrainian attacks on the Black Sea fleet in occupied Crimea, causing much of the Russian fleet to relocate to this Novorossiysk port. But Ukraine is steadfastly overcoming these range hurdles, with the Russian Navy, for instance, not having anywhere else to further pull back to. Not really. Then moving along on the map, because we also saw some activity much further north, as in a daring nighttime raid, Ukraine's military intelligence agency launched a drone attack on the production facilities of Russian state-owned weapons manufacturer Basalt in the oblast of Tula, as revealed by a military intelligence source. Russian air defenses claim to have shot down a total of 11 drones across various regions, including some in Bryansk and Kaluga. But as for this Tula event, the company Basalt, headquartered in Moscow, is reportedly the primary defense enterprise responsible for producing and supplying weapons and ammunition to Russia's ground forces, air force, and navy. So it very much seems like a militarily relevant attack. Then also on the map, but still in Russia, because it didn't stop there, as Ukrainian forces unleashed a barrage of attacks on multiple settlements in Russia's Belgorod oblast overnight, leaving some trails of destruction in their wake. The region's governor reported that a refueling location near the village of Besenovka was destroyed, a location that is about 25 miles northwest of Russia's northeastern Kharkiv push, making it not all that surprising a hit, as this direction is from where the Russian buildup of troops had occurred just prior to their incursions into the region last week. Now, it's possible, well, in fact, quite likely, that the Russian MOD has requested reinforcements from that direction to try to make their northern incursion as feasible as they possibly can. So events like these would not be all that assistive. Then headed to the Ukrainian map, where if we are to directly contrast the Ukrainian drone sortie's success against the Russian drone sortie's success, we find that Russia fired 20 drones into Ukraine overnight, with one key difference: all shot down. And so given this lopsided outcome, this asymmetry, it appears Ukraine may have overtaken Russia in terms of drone capabilities. That is to say, send in more or firing out more and being more successful with them. Which is interesting given that Zelensky recently stated he expected Ukraine to outperform Russia in drone warfare capabilities, particularly as it relates to longer range drones, by the end of 2024. So it would seem that Ukraine is, at the very least, on schedule for drone supremacy. Then further into the Ukrainian map, zooming right in, we'll head to the earlier mentioned region of Kharkiv, as the map mostly remains unchanged in this northern area of the oblast, with the fight for Vovchansk still ongoing. Despite this incursion, a number of reports suggest the situation is stabilizing, with some Ukrainian brigades holding their ground and preventing any further Russian progress. Also to note that the invading forces have not reached Ukraine's concrete line of defense, which lies near the first line where construction is hindered by constant shelling, so just beyond the green. And in total, Ukraine's defensive lines consist of 3 tiers, with the first and second lines built by the military, while the third most formidable line is constructed by local authorities. The third line's strength also lies in its distance from enemy weapons and shelling range. But in all of this, the Kremlin doesn't even want to capture Kharkiv, as he stated this just in the last day, and said that instead troops are creating a sanitary zone near the border. Now, I've seen some obvious whoppers of lies from the Kremlin in my time, but that has to be well, it doesn't even rate within the top 10, let's be honest. So this disinformation message from Putin himself is intended to placate his own internal constituency and the general public, purely to save face, because of the Russian army's failures to break and collapse Ukraine's frontline defenses in this northern region. And of course, Putin would also want Ukraine to believe this complete bollocks of a narrative, as Putin will take any chance he can get to take Kharkiv. Kharkiv city, the Kharkiv Oblast, to take what his army lost, and then take some more. Take. Moreover, we have a very old infographic flowchart from this channel to help you decide when you're not sure if the Putin is lying or not. It's pretty straightforward. Plus, as for some fallout related to the latest military engagements in this northern front, there are a lot of Russian Telegram channels listing a well above average attritional rate for Russian forces in this region. 500 MIA here, 500 KIA there, and that's just for one channel, and that's just in the last 24 hours. Just when you think Russia cannot outdo themselves on any previously wasteful metrics, they seem to just come back and hurt themselves even harder. In other words, it's not a sustainable approach for the Russian army. Then taking a look around the map, because somewhere mostly in the east, we see, starting off, a detonation of a Russian T-80 tank, after the arrival of a Ukrainian FPV drone in the Avdiivka direction. Then also we saw a destroyed Russian tank, a T-90 tank, near the settlement of Novobakhmutivka, just south of Avdiivka, stuck in a ditch, abandoned, destroyed. And the irony being that, more likely than not, it was a ditch made from a Russian artillery shell. Then, also in the northeast, we saw the Ukrainian military from the 33rd Separate Mechanized Brigade that repelled an armoured assault by the Russian forces. Then we move down back to Crimea as the activity still does not cease. As in a nighttime operation, dozens of unmanned aerial vehicles and naval drones targeted the port city of Sevastopol nearby Balaclava in the occupied peninsula. The drone strikes aimed at Russian military assets caused significant damage to a substation, resulting in power outages in the area. The Russian-installed head of Sevastopol reported that debris from a falling drone hit the Sevastopol substation, forcing the shutdown of equipment and triggering blackouts. So the extent of the damage is such that restoring the substation is expected to take at least a day, during which spot blackouts will be implemented while repairs are underway. But where things get really interesting in this region is from high-resolution satellite images that have revealed the extent of the damage inflicted upon the Belbek airfield following Ukrainian ATACMS cluster of missiles, and those strikes from the previous days. So the photos clearly show the complete destruction of 2 Russian MiG-31s and 1 Su-27 aircraft, as well as damage to at least another MiG-29. So the continued strikes against the Belbek airfield demonstrate the significant impacts that even a small number of ATACMS can have on enemy infrastructure and airfields, making the airfield increasingly untenable for use by Russian forces. They have to pull back, or not pull back, and continue to lose aircraft. Then headed across to some news for today. So Lithuania has announced that it will transfer 6 Amber 1800 radars to Ukraine as part of the German-led air defense initiative. So the Amber radars, designed for long-range air surveillance, will provide Ukrainian forces with early warning and detection of aerial threats, allowing them to respond quickly and effectively to potential attacks. Then in some more news, and in a significant boost to Ukraine's defensive capabilities, the Danish government has announced a substantial new package of military assistance worth 5.6 billion Danish kroners, or approximately $815 million, for which this comprehensive package allocates $350 million specifically for air defense systems, along with artillery pieces, shells, and other essential ammunition. Additionally, funds will be earmarked for future support of Ukraine's F-16 fighter jets, which are expected to begin arriving in the coming month or months. Then in some more news, Russian President Vladimir Putin, during his 2-day state visit to Beijing, told Chinese President Xi Jinping that his invasion of Ukraine is, quote, underway in all directions and is going quite well, end quote. Should I even dignify that with an answer? Now, Putin also promised to provide Xi with a detailed battlefield update in private. I wonder how that one's gonna go. So the Chinese and Russian delegations engaged in around 45 minutes of talks, which Putin described as warm and comradely. He also emphasized that both countries are working towards a multipolar world, rather than one dominated by NATO, and noted the similarity in their approaches to international public policy. Putin also declared in a related speech at the events that Russian and Chinese are brothers forever, quote unquote, but also with a very cringe-worthy expression you can see here, with a sentiment tantamount to sucking up to China to attempt to re-solidify this future backstabbing relationship. And you know it's true, nations like these use each other all the time, only when it's convenient. In fact, Russia has quite the backstabbing history already, which started long before even the Third Reich and the Soviets teamed up until it was no longer convenient, both backstabbing each other for further territorial ambitions. Then headed across to a quick funny to round it all off today, guys. So, in an attempt to replace Western jets by the year 2030, Russia is looking to fire up the production of their Sukhoi passenger aircraft jets again. So their new or latest project, a spin-off from their previous Superjet 100s, is claimed to feature 97% Russian-made components. When it finally gets off the ground. That pun was not intended, but I already knew how it was going to sound halfway through saying it. Now, the original Superjet 100 started with some humble Russian ideologies, yearning for a high degree of Russian componentry, but their industry failed to produce completely indigenous designs, leading to a lot of Western tech in those planes. Not just a bit, a lot. But Russia wants to start over now. Also, Russia has to start over now due to all of those Western sanctions. But I have a feeling that after they fail in their attempts to produce an overwhelmingly Russian-made passenger aircraft, they'll just switch gears and buy one of these. The Comac C919. The Chinese passenger plane, similar in scope and size to the Boeing 737 and Airbus A320, for which Russia would then likely just slap a Sukhoi badge on and call it their own. They've already been doing much the same with their Russian-made Ladas, the automotive vehicle, that turned out to be 99% Chinese. Pretty much everything but the badge. Now, as for these new Russian planes, if we are to take an even closer look at the Russian-sanctioned Western components in the Comac jet, it leads me to actually still maintain that Russian air travel is going to be mostly a thing of the past. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment. Thank you for all the support. It really does help keep this small fry channel going. And I do hope to see all of you guys there on the next one. Cheers.